tell people I work on film made before 1950, or as I call them, the good ones. Anybody here for the first time? First timers? Wow, welcome. Thank you for coming. If you haven't been here before, there's just a few rules that the regulars know all about. We ask you not to eat, drink, smoke, spit, chew. If you have a cell phone, please turn it completely off. If we catch you using it, we will confiscate it, sell it on eBay, and use the money. First off, I want to thank Matt Barton for putting together the CD of money songs. Did you get the irony that all the songs you were listening to were about money before watching a film called Greed? We thought it was kind of clever to kind of lighten the mood before the film starts. And I'd like to thank our very special guest who drove all the way down from New York.
By train.
You drove the train? And Mr. Ben Modell. We are fortunate to have Ben Modell. He is one of the best accompanists in the world. I can say that because he has played many times in Europe, Canada, North America. And I asked you earlier today, have you played for Greed before?
Yes. When I started playing for films when I was in film school, this was part of the canon of films. So I would play for this picture about once a year for about 4 or 5 years, and then it's one of those films that's so well known nobody shows it. So it's been pretty rare. I played for it a couple of years ago, so this is going to be a lot of fun as much fun as this picture can be.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, when I was doing research for the film, we were talking about earlier today, my boss is actually here in the auditorium tonight, and he said if I kept the introduction short, maybe I could get that raise I've been waiting for, but I had to tell him doing a short introduction for such a legendary movie was hard. My introduction was going to be 40 minutes, and I cut it in half to 20, and then the editors took it away from me and cut it down to 8 minutes, so... First off, I want to say thanks to my friend George Willeman, who's sitting in the back with his son Jamie. Hi, George. Thanks for programming tonight's very special feature. When I asked him greedily if I could introduce it, I said I would have played it last June during my month, but because of the Mostly Lost Film Festival, it turned out all the accompanimists were busy and we couldn't play any silence during my time. So that's how I stole it away from George. Today, if you ask a film archivist what would be the biggest find, the movie's holy grail, you'd most likely hear The Lost Reels of Greed. Greed has been voted one of the best films of the silent era by many historians and early film experts for decades. Yet the release version, which only runs about 2 hours, is only a quarter of the length of the original and half the length of the edited down version that director Erich von Stroheim was willing to accept. It prompts the question, if the 2-hour butchered version is so good, how much better might the original 4-hour or 8-hour version be? This film was based on the book McTeague, A Story of San Francisco, written by Frank Norris when he was only 23 years old. He was a newspaper reporter that covered the true events of this story, and he dug deep. Norris went so far as to rent the rooms to live in where these crimes happened to soak up the atmosphere. His naturalistic style became the forerunner of docudramas like Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Erich von Stroheim, director of tonight's film, is best remembered today for his role in Sunset Boulevard, ironically as a has-been director, earning a living as a butler. He was so good at that role, he was nominated for an Academy Award. Sadly, his only one. Stroheim had also been a newspaper reporter before he became an actor, studying under the groundbreaking director D.W. Griffith. By January of 1923, when Stroheim started filming Greed, he had already appeared in 24 films, he had written the scripts for 4 films, and assisted directing on 10 titles, including The Birth of a Nation. But it was his directing style of relentless attention to details that both made and broke him. He started his directing career at Universal Studios with a huge hit called Blind Husbands, which he also wrote and starred in. It ran a little bit over budget and time. His second film, The Devil's Passkey, no longer survives. His third feature, Foolish Wives, with its minutely detailed reconstruction of Monte Carlo, he spent $1 million on the sets. ran up exorbitant production cost, and was cut at studio executive Irving Thalberg's insistence from 34 reels down to 10. An example of Stroheim excesses, he insisted on handmade, period, authentic underwear, even though it would go unseen. He said it would help the actors feel their parts. Thalberg had enough of Stroheim's running over budget with his next film, The Merry-Go-Round. He fired the director and edited out 1/3 of the final film before releasing it. So Stroheim went to Goldwyn Studios. Did you see the logo in the slideshow? Amazing how the Goldwyn logo looks a little bit like MGM's. I hate it that Goldwyn came up with the motto, art for art's sake, and as soon as MGM bought the rights to that logo, they cut this film. Let's see, Stroheim went to Goldwyn Studios to make what he hoped would be his masterpiece. He wanted to film Norris's book, McTeague, completely as it was, not skipping a page. He thought it was that good. Stroheim said agreed, I was not going to compromise. I felt that after the last war, the motion picture going public had tired of the cinematic chocolate eclairs which had been stuffed down their throat. I felt they were ready for a large dose of honest corned beef and cabbage. I felt they had become weary of the Pollyanna stories and their doll-like heroines and sterile heroes. I had graduated from the D.W. Griffith School of Filmmaking and intended to go the master one better as regards to film realism. So Stroheim went to the rooms where the real story had happened, captured every detail, not only in filming, but he had his cast sleep and live there too. For casting, he chose Gibson Gowland, a blonde, curly-headed English actor, as his gentle giant, but with smoldering fires deep inside as McTeague. For Trina, the female lead, Stroheim said he picked comedian Zasu Pitts because he saw within her the tragedy that she never got to prove she was a great actress, and that pain was just dammed up inside of her. For the third member of our triangle, Stroheim hired Gene Hersholt from seeing his performances in other films. Having never met him, Stroheim hit the ceiling when they were finally introduced. He said, no way, just look at his eyes. He's too kind for the role. He needs to have slicked down hair that's poorly cut, smoke stubby cigars, and wear ill-fitting loud suits, etc. So the next day, guess who showed up exactly as the director had described and won back the role? The man the Oscars Humanitarian Award is named for, Gene Hersholt. Stroheim spent 9 months filming in 1923, driving his cast and crew to get everything exactly as he saw it in his mind's eye. But being a creative director, writer, and producer, he also added scenes as he shot his masterpiece. In the beginning of the story, he wrote about 10 minutes more of the young man growing up a miner with an alcoholic father. He even persuaded the studio to rent the closed Big Dipper mine where it had really happened and rebuilt an entire mining camp. Famed cinematographer William Daniels said he hoped Stroheim would just be happy filming scenes inside the mine. But no, Stroheim wanted them shot 3,000 feet down. He rephotographed one shot 20 times until he had personally rubbed enough dirt on the miners to make it look more realistic. Harry Carr, one of the lucky few who saw the first rough cut of the film in January, it's a year later, after months of editing, wrote, I saw a wonderful picture the other day that no one else will ever see. It was the unslaughtered version of Greed. It was a magnificent piece of work, but it was 42 reels long, 10 hours, 42 reels. This is 42 reels of film labeled Greed, Erich von Stroheim's director's cut. We went into the projecting room at 10:30 in the morning. We staggered out at 8 that night. I can't imagine what they're going to do with it. Episodes come along that you think have no bearing on the story, and then 12 or 14 reels later, it hits you with a crash. For stark, terrible realism and marvelous artistry, it is the greatest picture I've ever seen, but I don't know what it will look like when it shrinks from 42 to 8 reels. After nearly a year of editing, for which Stroheim was not paid, the film went through various cuts, from 8 hours to 6 hours, down to a 4-hour version. Basically, Stroheim was willing to use half the amount of film behind me. Then he gave it to a friend of his who cut out another 8 reels. And then the studio said, not enough. That's the amount of film they chose to use. And then fate stepped in. Golden Studios was struggling to keep afloat and bought out and merged with Metro Pictures, which was run by Louis B. Mayer. That's right, the unfinished Greed was going to be owned by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer under the supervision of Mayer's right-hand man, the Wonder Kid, and Stroheim's archenemy, Irving Thalberg. The studio intervened, cutting the film down to the 10-reel version in which the film survives today. Ironically, the excise footage of this epic about the dangers of gold was allegedly destroyed by the studio for the film stock's silver content. As critic Jonathan Rosenbaum rightly points out in his recent book on Greed, it is difficult to determine what Stroheim considered to be the definitive version of the film. At the same time, even in its mutilated form, the surviving 10-reel version plays remarkably well today. Many still consider it among the greatest of silent films. So what did they cut out? Obviously, the longer mining and family scenes at the beginning, several subplots, one about a crazed junk man who murders his Mexican wife, one a sweet story of 2 old people who find true spiritual love while everyone around them is falling into corruption, the problems of Karina's German immigrant family, and even a sweet story about 2 dogs that make friends through a backyard fence, demonstrating in contrast that dogs can be humane while mankind can become beast. All of these elements meant to balance the story are gone from the film, and 2 years of a man's work was taken out of his hands to cut it into a more convenient size. Seek out the book for the rest of the story. By the way, cutting it into separate films might have worked perfectly. Has anyone seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy? If you add up the running time of all 3 of those films, it's a few minutes over 10 hours, the same version that Stroheim wanted. Think of this version of Greed as you would the famous painting of the Last Supper, but showing only 3 of the 12 disciples. Thank you all for coming.